In one of my podcast episodes, therapist Aisha Grevenberg said to me that therapy is not for abusive men. And after all the years that I've been doing this, people keep saying, tell him to go to therapy. He needs therapy. He needs to figure out why he's like this. He needs to heal. None of that will actually help an abusive man. There is a reason that what she said stopped me dead in my tracks. This is the advice that everybody gives. He just needs therapy. As if therapists are, magicians. As if they have the ability to heal and cure abusive men. I think most people don't know what therapy is for. If you think abusive men would benefit from therapy, you need to check what it is actually for. What is the purpose? I'm not anti-therapy. I am pro-therapy. As a certified relationship coach, there is a space for people like me with my qualifications, but there is absolutely a space for licensed mental health professionals. Therapy is amazing, but not for abusers. Without a doubt, therapy can help people heal and regulate and process trauma and change patterns, and I get that. It can help people be more honest with themselves. But therapy also has certain assumptions that are kind of necessary. We can debate all day if therapists should be making these assumptions or not, but when they make these assumptions and they apply them to abusive men, therapy can actually be dangerous. Because the thing is, you assume he's telling the truth. You assume that he's there in good faith. You assume that he's motivated by a desire to want to heal, or that he's confused or wounded or dysregulated or just unskilled. I've made content on the skills that men are missing that would make them better at relationships. But you don't just go to therapy and learn the skills. We can't skip step one. Step one is wanting to change. It's seeing that you are part of a problem. That is a huge problem for abusive men, not just narcissistic ones. All abusive men don't see themselves as the problem. More often than not, abusive men think that all of their behavior isn't abusive because it's justified. This is a man who's not confused. Now, he's invested. He's absolutely invested in keeping his partner, and that might show up as insecurity or desperation in a therapy session, but that's not what's happening. He probably lacks language to actually heal, but he's going to use the language that he's learning against you. He might not understand his trauma. I think most people don't, in fact, not just abusive men. Most people don't necessarily understand their own trauma and the effect that it's had on them. But again, you have to want to see it. You have to want to change it. Therapy is really designed to understand a person. But abuse intervention has to confront what that person is actually doing to someone else. So in this video, I'm going to break down why ordinary individual therapy can make abusive men worse, why couples therapy can be absolutely dangerous, what a lot of therapists miss, what this does to the woman, and what abusive men actually need instead. My name is Lisa Sonni. I'm a certified relationship coach, and I study abusive men. I help women exit and heal from abusive and toxic relationships with men, learn how to love themselves, learn how to be more confident, find themselves, build self-trust, and just know yourself. So if this is something you need, hit subscribe, and let's get into this. This is a really interesting topic. I think therapy often kind of starts by believing the story that the person tells. And the truth is, we can always say therapists shouldn't come in with that framework, but to be fair, you go off of what a person is saying to you. So all therapy is going to start with the client's version of reality. And it actually makes sense, okay? Therapists aren't mind readers as much as we wish they could be. They can only work with what the person actually brings into the room. But when the client is abusive, the therapist couldn't possibly tell off of 1 or 2 sessions because abusers are really good at this, right? They're bringing in very curated stories. He's going to present himself as hurt and misunderstood or rejected, and he's got a horrible wife, and he's never good enough, and he walks on eggshells, or he's afraid to speak, but he's going to leave out the context. Now, you could say that therapists need to be asking for the context, but therapy also only works if the therapist has a good relationship with the person that they're talking to. And starting right off the bat with, well, what did you do right before that, is a terrible way to start therapy. I'm not even 100% sure what the solutions are. I think more training is definitely part of it. So for example, a therapist is going to hear, my wife gets mad every single time I speak. I can't even say anything without her overreacting. She's always angry. I feel like I don't even have a voice. But what he's not going to say is that, well, listen, when I speak to my wife, I use passive aggressive tone all the time. I have such contempt for her. I actually poke her until she reacts. So I'm only describing to you when she's reacting, right? I don't like when she gets mad, but I don't really want to tell you all the things I did to get her there. He'll never tell the therapist that he punishes her with withdrawal or that she's actually the one walking on eggshells. And the thing is, people can sort of question, like, does this abusive man actually believe the stuff that he's saying? Sometimes no, but sometimes yes. This is what I mean. Abusive behavior comes from a mindset. They believe that they're just delivering justified consequences for whatever it is that you did. He probably doesn't even recognize, but again, even if he does, he is not going to explain to his therapist that when he speaks, it's actually control or criticism, blame, that he intimidates her. So a therapist is obviously going to start helping him process how painful it is that his wife gets mad every time he speaks. And now therapy has been given the wrong frame. Therapists aren't bad. They're not evil. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They have to go off of what the person is saying. They're working from incomplete information and, frankly, distorted information. So if the therapist is operating from his version of the story, it's just another place where reality goes to die. And the thing with therapy, right? It's there to talk about trauma and pain and how that affects your life. But abuse is not about pain. Abuse isn't caused by trauma. Abuse is caused by entitlement. And in fact, I was talking with a therapist, Stephen Ng, and he asked me, what is the cause of abuse? It's kind of meant to be a rhetorical question, but I was like, entitlement. And then he was like, actually, no, abuse isn't caused by anything. It's a choice, right? It is only caused by a person making a choice. So a good therapist is going to look for these wounds underneath behavior like childhood trauma, attachment injuries, shame, fear of abandonment, insecurity. They're going to talk to you about your family history. They're going to want to learn about if you have experienced emotional neglect, if you're suffering from something like depression or anxiety. And listen, all of those things could in fact be true. Those things could have happened to a perpetrator of abuse, but they're not the cause. And that's the danger, because you're healing, in theory, those things. You're working on those things, and it will never change the person's choice to be abusive. Because if a therapist treats abuse as, I'm going to say, an expression of his pain, then the abuse is going to be explained, not confronted, right? His trauma is now, do you see, because of your trauma? Do you see, because your dad? So his feelings become a project, and his past becomes a reason why everyone else around him needs to be patient while he tries so hard to stop willfully choosing to be abusive. And meanwhile, the woman in this scenario is still being controlled and punished and threatened and blamed and psychologically beaten down. Now he's going to come home and say crazy things like, I just shut down because conflict really triggers me. I yell because I grew up in a house where no one listened. Stop it. The therapist is giving him language. Again, those things might have shreds of truth, but it does not justify or cause abuse. And the truth is, the amount of therapists that will disagree with me, I find absolutely disgusting. I genuinely do, because I know plenty. I know dozens and dozens of therapists personally who would agree that therapy does not help abusive men. It definitely doesn't help pathological, disordered people who are choosing to be abusive. You get this abusive guy in the office saying, well, I'm just controlling because I'm so scared of losing her. And then the therapist is going to explore the fear. But she's living within that control. So because he's afraid she has to live under surveillance, I don't think so. His trauma doesn't mean that he's just intimidating her and that that's okay, or that she has to tolerate it until he figures out how to stop. That's all just garbage. Understanding his wound does not protect her from his behavior. And it should, right? But it doesn't. It doesn't protect women. It makes women want to understand him more. It creates a lot more empathy, compassion, and arguably even pity. And none of these things are actually going to make the relationship better. But therapy is going to give him better language, right? And I think that's truly probably one of the biggest dangers all around, because therapy gives people language. And that is so beautiful when someone is lost. In fact, I actually find with my content, a lot of people tell me, you're giving me language. That's great to be giving good people language. We all know that there's perpetrators of abuse watching my content and other people's content and learning the exact same things. That's why a lot of men will show up in the comment sections and try to flip the conversation and just immediately flip the gender without ever realizing that you can't flip the gender because the power imbalance is going to stay exactly where it was. So therapy is going to help people name their feelings and set boundaries and communicate better, maybe even take responsibility, but not an abusive man. He's just going to use the same language and use it as a weapon because now he's got better words. The amount of abusive men that in the last few years as therapy has become much more popular, because there's an old myth, right? Abusive men and narcissists never seek therapy. Maybe that was true when therapy wasn't cool, but everybody now talks about their therapist in open conversation. It's pretty normal to go to therapy, and I love that it's becoming normalized. But now you have abusive men saying like, oh, I have a boundary. You're not allowed to get mad at me when I do something completely awful. You're not respecting my nervous system. I need emotional safety too, Sally. It's ridiculous. They'll tell you like, you know what? You're dysregulated. I can't talk to you like that. Your tone is abusive. I'm practicing self-protection. None of these things coming out of an abusive man's mouth makes any sense. Now, a man can learn any of these things, an abusive man. Please hear the distinction, right? We're not talking about every man. We're talking about the abusive ones. Some of these phrases can sound so mature. And honestly, when he goes into therapy and he's learning the language and maybe he's less abusive than he was last week, it's like, oh, look, therapy's working. It's helping him. Therapy can be used to avoid accountability. You take a man who's like passive aggressive all morning, just being snippy and passive aggressive, okay? And you finally say, why are you being like this? And he's like, I have a boundary. You know what? I won't be spoken to with hostility. That's my boundary. But he created it. But he doesn't want to talk about that part. He just wants to regurgitate whatever language a therapist gave him without context. They give him the language of boundaries, but then he's using it to just say that there's no impact of his behavior. So therapy language in the hands of an abusive man, it actually makes manipulation kind of sound healthy, but it's not when you actually look at it. But when you're a victim of abuse and you're in it, you're already gaslit and out of touch with reality, and you feel like you're losing it. And now he sounds like he's doing the work, and he's not. It's a lie. Now, where therapy, in my opinion, can become wildly, extremely dangerous for women who are in abusive relationship is that if he presents her reaction without his behavior, which is what they do, he becomes the victim, right? She yells, she cries, she accuses me of things. She never lets things go. She gets so angry every time I try to talk to her. She makes me feel like I'm a monster, but he's never going to say what happened before that. And I always find it so interesting because men are kings of, but what happened before that, right? When a man does something, they want to know what happened. Men don't just do that, right? He had to have been provoked, but they can never see that they are provoking someone. It's the most crazy making thing about men to me. You think abusive men are going into therapy and saying, I lied and I gaslight her. Actually, I do threaten to leave her. And sometimes I ignore her for days. I accuse her of cheating even when I really know she's not. It's just, keep her in line. No, he's not going to tell the therapist that he cornered you in the kitchen or that he wakes you up at 2:00 in the morning and coerces you into sex or to keep arguing. He's never going to say those things, that he says horribly cruel things and then calls you dramatic. He doesn't want the therapist to know those things because that would tell way too much of the story. So if the therapist doesn't see provocation, the therapy is actually going to strengthen his belief that she is the problem. And then he comes home with this clinical backup. My therapist actually said, you're the problem. Even my therapist thinks that your reactions are unhealthy. My therapist said that I need to have more boundaries with you. I can't keep engaging when you're dysregulated. Now, the victim is being gaslit with professional sounding language. So if therapy only sees her reaction and it never sees his pattern because he's not talking about it, then how does that help? This is why individual therapy does not automatically just mean he's going to be accountable, because insight isn't accountability. Neither is emotional awareness. Crying, nope, not accountability. everything he's doing in there, right? Understanding his childhood trauma and learning attachment language and all of this stuff, none of it means that he's going to stop harming her. That's what accountability would be. He would own it, name it, stop it. Stop it is easily the most important part if that's not abundantly clear. He would be able to sit in therapy and name the behavior without blaming her. Do you know how rare it is, although it is absolutely possible, to find therapists who actually will sit there and, when I say call you out, challenge you in a professional way, actually look at what you're doing to contribute to your own situations. This applies in non-abusive situations. Therapy can be so amazing when somebody says, okay, but you can't control the other person, so what could you do differently, right? More therapists doing that would be better for everyone. This is just a man sitting here trying to figure out how to evade all consequences because he's only going to tell the truth if it costs him nothing. So women get completely trapped here because they think this guy's off doing the work and he's not. And you hear it. I'm in therapy. I'm working on myself. My God, what, you expect perfection overnight? My therapist says the healing takes time. Again, and it's true, but you're not giving the therapist all the information. If therapy doesn't make him more safe, if it doesn't make him more honest, if it's not creating accountability, if it's not making him less controlling, then therapy is just part of his friggin' performance of what a good man he is, right? I'm not that bad, see? I'm going to therapy, nice little pat on the back for him. Therapy is just interpreting his abuse through the lens of excuses, which is not really what it was meant to do. So you might think, okay, well, that's individual therapy, right? So if you can get in the room with him and you do couples therapy, then hey, that'll be much better because now there's context. And I can completely appreciate why people think that. And in fact, I used to think that. But couples therapy is incredible when both people have good faith and are there to be honest and can speak freely. But in an abusive relationship, I think it's pretty common knowledge at this point that it is wildly dangerous to be doing therapy with an abuser. There are so many ways that this can go south, but the truth is the model itself is the problem. Couples therapy is such an interesting thing because it has to kind of assume that both people are contributing to the relationship problem, which in a toxic relationship, in a healthy relationship with problems, both people probably are. Even if it's one more than the other, you don't really want to get into that kind of semantics when you're in couples therapy. But when you're in couples therapy with an abuser, it's actually not two people contributing to the problem. And I know that a lot of abusive men would fight that, right? Like, no, she provokes me, right? But the problem is still that you're choosing abusive behavior when you feel provoked. Because again, she's provoking you. That's not really what's happening. You feel provoked. You feel triggered or activated. It might not be that her intention is to provoke you, but you feel provoked. So you have choices. But an abusive man doesn't see choices. And he's not going into therapy to learn choices. He's going in to figure out why he behaves this way and come out with a whole bag of excuses. In couples therapy, you have to assume that both people can speak freely and that they're safe to do that and that they're going to be honest and that there's basically equal power. But no, in abusive relationships, that's not what's happening. She's not safe to tell the truth. He can punish her after the session. He can use anything vulnerable that was shared in that session against her later. He's going to perform calmness and openness and safety in front of a therapist. And he's going to make the victim look totally unstable because she's sitting there crying or angry or shaking, possibly desperate. So like she will say, I feel scared when he gets angry, right? And then he goes like, do you see, this is what I mean? She always makes me sound abusive. No, you're abusive, right? Now she has to probably defend the word scared in front of a professional who's there trying to mediate an issue between two people. There's nothing safe about it. Couples therapy is such a bad idea, but I think the issue, and a lot of people still go into couples therapy anyway, even hearing this, because you first need to know that it's abuse, and you first need to believe that therapy is not going to help an abusive man before you do that. And then if you believe that, why would you do it? You would know that it's not going to work, right? So you wouldn't do it. So it's such a catch-22, to be honest, because you don't know if it's abuse and you don't know if it's really the cause. You think it's just toxic. If you think it's childhood trauma, he's going to jump on that and then go to therapy, couples or individual, and talk about his childhood trauma. There's no end to it. You are screwed. It's very much a double bind. Couples therapy can kind of flip abuse into this shared communication problem. That's really what couples therapy is for, like minor issues, communication issues, disagreements between you, getting more on the same page, much more surface level than people really, really realize. They're teaching you skills, but unfortunately, abusive men are weaponizing those skills. Most therapists are not assessing for abuse. And actually, this is where too many therapists get really offended. It is a fact, an unequivocal fact, that most therapists have close to no training in domestic abuse, and the ones that do have very little training in domestic abuse, certainly not in personality disorders and domestic violence of any kind. For the most part, there is minimal training, in some cases zero. But what do you do with minimal training? Like a semester in a 4-year program or one program, one book within a program. It's not enough. And the thing is, you look at the kind of people that become therapists, they're generally good people. I know a lot of people will say, oh, so many therapists are narcissists. Sure, because they're everywhere. Most therapists are good people. They're highly empathetic. They care deeply. They really, really want to help. But that doesn't make them trained in coercive control and manipulation and DARVO, post-separation abuse, or anything. It really doesn't. So we always tell people, well, if you're being abused, go to therapy. Just go to therapy. Get him in therapy. You need therapy. Don't talk to your friends and family. See a therapist. Why on earth would you be encouraging people to sign up with people who are not trained in the problem that those people are experiencing? You need therapists who are trained, and there are plenty, maybe not even the majority, but they exist, and that's what victims of abuse need. If you even suspect that you are in an abusive relationship, if you even think it might be on the table, when you are looking for a licensed therapist, you look for someone who has experience in that, who has training and understands it. Because in couples therapy, an abusive man can seem wonderful, calm and reflective and sad. He can totally sit there and be self-aware and regretful, and then you look reactive. You look angry and exhausted and flooded and hard to soothe. You look all these things. But if the therapist doesn't understand abuse and power and control dynamics, they're going to misread the room. They're going to see him as regulated, and they could see you as the problem. And the truth is, even if the therapist can see, what is it that you really expect a therapist to do? Because if they call him out, and I'm a certified coach, but I get a lot of people being like, do you see couples? Can you tell my husband that he's abusive? Are you crazy? So that he can go hurt you when I'm not there anymore? When we're no longer sitting on a Zoom call? You can't have therapists just calling out abusive men so that later it can be you manipulated the therapist and you made her this and she's a B word and she's stupid anyway. You're just going to find yourself out of therapy when you went in for help. I can tell you from personal experience, I had 2 circumstances where I was in couples therapy with an abuser, the same abuser. And the first one was telling me that I needed to be more respectful. I decided, and maybe the therapist decided, that he was the more challenging one, the more difficult one. So I could see that the therapist was trying to sort of build a relationship with him. So he got to go first with explaining his problems. And after 2, 3, 4 sessions, it kept circling back to, I needed to be more respectful in my communication. So no context was given to why I was short with him and cold and frankly snippy. And I absolutely was, there's no question. But why was I acting that way? And you could say it doesn't matter, we all need to be respectful. You stay respectful after 7 years of abuse, right? Like that's crazy to expect that. But when you're not given the freedom to give context, and I wasn't, then we both left there. I was pissed and he was justified. And eventually I stopped couples therapy because it was insane to me. And to be fair, that couples therapist has no training whatsoever in abuse or anything even like that. Now, interestingly, years later, we ended up back in couples therapy. She saw everything. She completely saw, and that's a whole other story for another video, but that actually saved my life. So as I sit here telling you, don't do couples therapy, if you are going to ignore me and you're going to do it anyway, you need to find somebody who is absolutely trained in abuse. Even if you think maybe it's not abuse, I hope it's not abuse, even if you're experiencing cognitive dissonance, you need to have somebody that's trained. because you don't want to sit there and have somebody teaching him emotional language without assessing whether he actually uses language to control. What therapists need to be assessing is there fear in the relationship? Is one person monitoring the other? Is somebody using punishment? Is there coercion? Are there arguments? Do people retaliate after somebody does something or after a hard conversation? Is there accountability, and does it lead to repair or does it lead to punishment? Can she safely disagree? Could she safely leave? And how do you assess that when the person in front of you is like, of course she can safely leave. Of course I'm nice to her. No, I never do these things. The therapist is not a mind reader. They don't have video cameras set up in your house. So obviously they can miss abuse when they assess the argument, but they need to be looking at the power structure. And that's not on me or you to teach them. That needs to be part of their education programs. And again, for some it is. And even the ones that are, if you're just dealing with your average sort of couples for so many years and you don't often face abusive people sitting in front of you, you might miss it. A friend of mine who's actually a psychologist, retired now, but had practiced for over 20 years, upon reflection was like, I wonder how many couples sat in front of me and I didn't recognize abuse back then, but I would have now. It's such an interesting thing. And I think most therapists would agree. Really, most would, but you get some that really get their back up and defend their profession so hard instead of listening to the survivor stories where people have been so invalidated by too many therapists. So here's the core. What do abusive men actually need? They don't need more insight into how they feel and their pain. They need accountability for their behavior, and they need intervention that is focused on abuse. When they're behaving in an entitled way, they need somebody to challenge them. They need somebody to step up and say, hey. Now, the truth is, they need other men. Okay, it's not that women can't be the therapist for abusive men or be a facilitator for this, but the best possible method is men in a men's group, being held accountable by a group of men. There's kind of a team vibe there, right? Like, none of us accept this. None of us think that what you're doing is okay. None of us think that screaming at your wife is normal. They need to be surrounded by good, safe men. They need to be surrounded by men that don't collude with just broad women blaming, because that's like the echo chamber of the red pill, right? It's women. Women are the problem. In fact, one of the most crazy making things that I personally see is men aren't allowed to talk about their feelings, and men aren't allowed to just be themselves, and men have to uphold all of this masculinity. Men have to this, and it's women's fault. You mean the patriarchy. They say women when they mean the patriarchy, the thing that these horrible, bitter feminists are trying to dismantle because the patriarchy hurts men and women, but they say women need to let men talk. No, because often abusive men are not talking, right? I can't share my feelings, not allowed to have feelings. You're screaming in your wife's face. Little spittles are getting on her cheeks because you're in her face. But you think you should be able to because that's an expression of feeling. You need to learn how to safely express your feelings. Men are allowed to have feelings, and they are not allowed to scream at their wives. Why is that so hard? Women are taught how to do these things. Men don't seem to be taught these things. Men need to be in a room with facilitators who understand power and control. Where are the Stephen Ings? Where are the Chuck Derrys? Where are the Lundy Bancrofts? They need to be in rooms with men like those. Okay? They don't need to sit here and worry about, oh, my wife. Stop controlling, stop intimidating, stop punishing, stop lying, coercing, and stop blaming. Actually take accountability. Stop making your partner responsible for your behavior. Men are constantly going on about women not taking accountability. And when you ask them for what, it is always for provoking men into behaving a certain way. So according to men, men are easily provoked and weak and emotionally dysregulated. According to men, not me. I didn't say that. They said that. That's why Batterer intervention programs and men's nonviolence programs, they're different from ordinary therapy. That's why it's a whole different thing. DV hotlines even say that Batterer intervention programs center accountability, victim safety, and education about abusive behaviors. That matters. It's not just a counseling approach. And in fact, I've had the absolute pleasure of interviewing Chuck Derry, who is the founder of the Gender Violence Institute. He's retired now, And he was very connected to the Duluth model. In Duluth-style men's violence programs, they actually focus on challenging entitlement. And they're naming power differences. There's accountability and support for victims built right into the model. So an abusive man doesn't need better excuses because that just hurts the victim, right? You feel even crazier when it's used against you. It's absolutely awful. So at the end of the day, listen, I'm not anti-therapy. I'm absolutely not. I think therapy is absolutely amazing. It can help people heal. It can help people rebuild. It can help people become more honest and regulated. Amazing, okay? But ordinary therapy is not the right intervention for an abusive man because abuse is not like, oh, I didn't know I was abusive. He knows he's abusive. He believes he's entitled to be that way. I'm not going to say abusive, right? Because to him, it's not abuse if he's not intending to harm you. It's only abuse if he, I don't know, punches you in the face, right? He doesn't think that screaming at you, coercing you, controlling you, making things so uncomfortable and so scary for you that you just automatically change your behavior. He sees that as, hey, I never told her she couldn't go out. She just doesn't go out. She doesn't go out because you made it so uncomfortable. That's just one of many examples. But he has to be able to see that. Abuse is a behavior problem caused by a man's choice to be abusive. It is about entitlement and a lack of accountability. Therapy is not going to help for that. So when he says, I'm in therapy, you have more questions. Is he safer? Is he more accountable? Is he less controlling? Because therapy is not the proof. Who cares if he's in therapy? Who cares if he is in therapy? Changed behavior is the proof. Subscribe if you're not already. And if you're stuck trying to figure out whether his therapy actually means that he's changing, if you're wondering if he's safer, if you're really trying to see if the work that he's doing is actually effective, you can work with me one-on-one. You can join any of my group coaching programs or join me inside my online community, She Rises Collective. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.